Hi everyone, we will start in 1 minute. Uh, we will wait this minute to let every one of the attendees that were in the waiting room to enter. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. On behalf of UNESCO, the University for Peace, the King Hamad Global Center for Coexistence and Tolerance, and Arigato International, I am delighted to welcome you to our third webinar in the series on hate speech and education. Today, we are focusing on the theme A Digital Generation, addressing impacts of online hate speech on children and youth. And we are honored to have participants joining us from many parts of the world, bringing together diverse perspectives and experiences. Thank you for making the time to be here with us today. Before we continue, a quick reminder that this webinar is available with simultaneous interpretation, both into Spanish and Arabic. On the Zoom toolbar, please click the interpretation icon, which is in the bottom right part of the menu, and select your preferred language. It can be either, you will find there the English, Spanish, or Arabic channels. And if you wish to only listen the interpretation in the original language, then you can also click mute original audio. To ensure a smooth session for today, here are a few simple guidelines. Regarding your name, please add to your Zoom name the organization or the country you are connecting from. We would love to see and hear from when you are joining us today. Then, regarding the chat, you'll be able to interact only through the chat. We invite you to introduce yourselves there and share where you're joining from. We encourage you to interact with the fellows through it. Regarding the questions to the speakers, please share your questions with the speakers through the Q&A section. You will find that in the bottom part of the menu in the middle. There's a Q&A with a sign, with a question mark there. Not all questions might be addressed by the moderator and shared with the panelists. So I also encourage panelists to check the questions and answers section. And if you see a question that is directly addressed to you and the moderator hasn't shared it, please, you can answer it directly in writing through there. Unfortunately, we won't be having the participation from the UN Office on Genocide Prevention today, since the Secretary General has just appointed a new special advisor two weeks ago. And so we extend the office apologies to you all. We are very pleased to have with us today an outstanding group of speakers. So without further delay, let me introduce you to our moderator for today's webinar, Mr. Kwani Kirkwani. He's program specialist from the section of Global Citizenship and Peace Education in the UNESCO headquarters. He's a global citizen from South Sudan and currently he co-leads the initiatives on education for peace, including the efforts to address hate speech. So once again, thank you for being with us. And Kwani, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome from wherever you are joining us. We are very grateful that you are able to make the time to be with us today to discuss this pertinent issue. And as you know, and without taking a lot of detail from the discussion, you know hate speech is rising globally, particularly online. There was an Ipsos UNESCO survey that was conducted in 2023 that found that 2 out of 3 people encounter hateful or harmful content online. And since many young people, many of the online community is young, it follows consequently that many of those affected by hate speech and harmful content in general are young people. And so, on the other hand, we also know that education can be transformative. In addition, of course, to hate speech manifesting itself in places or spaces of learning, we also know for sure that in general, education can be a transformative tool to address hate speech. Keeping in mind that we address hate speech in itself because of its impact on individuals, communities, and societies at large, but we also address hate speech because of what it might lead to, as the Secretary General mentioned in the foreword to the UN strategy and plan of action on addressing hate speech. Hate speech is usually an alarm bell for extreme violences like atrocity crimes. And so that is the other reasons to why we must counter and address hate speech for what it might lead to. With that, today we will explore what education can do specifically, particularly transformative education, with regards to hate speech in general, but hate speech that manifests itself online. And I am joined by a distinguished panelist, and so allow me, before we dive into the discussion, allow me to quickly introduce them. I begin with Mr. Ibrahim Dawood Nunu, who is a board member of the King Ahmad Global Center for Coexistence and Tolerance. He's also a businessman and a community leader. A former Shura Council member, he brings decades of leadership experience and is dedicated to combating hate speech and promoting social cohesion. We are very happy to have you, Mr. Ibrahim. Sibu Siamanuska, apologies for butchering the pronunciation. I hope to get better as we progress in the discussion. Sibu is a global citizen with a background in human rights, international conflict, and economics. With working experience globally, she has been an ACWAY fellow since 2019, actively engaging in interfaith dialogue and youth-led initiatives. With professional experience as a content analyst at Meta and Google, and as a digital creator, Sibu focuses on addressing cross-cultural understanding and breaking stereotypes. Welcome, Sibu, and wonderful to have you with us today. Mr. Imran Ahmed is the founder and CEO of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. He is an authority on social and psychological malignancies on social media, such as identity-based hate, extremism, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. He regularly appears in the news media and in documentaries as an expert voice on online harms and advises policymakers and legislators around the world. Welcome, Imran. Happy to have you with us today. Dr. Maria Teresa Garrido is an associate professor in the Department of International Law at the University for Peace, the doctoral committee coordinator, and the deputy director at the Global Center for Peace Innovation. Our main research area is related to the exercise of the right to freedom of expression and the protection of journalists in Latin America, as well as the interaction between human rights and information and communication technologies through the use of mixed methodologies and legal research to explore linkages between the law and new technologies. Welcome, Dr. Maria Teresa. And Antia Solino is a global citizenship project technician responsible for implementing the Head Trackers Beyond Borders project, which ran from 2023 to 2025, thanks to funding from the European Union. Welcome, Antia. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, Lord Ravol, OBE, is a member of the House of Lords and founder of Faith in Leadership. He has pioneered leadership programs across sectors and continents, committed to challenging hate speech and building coexistence through interfaith collaboration, mentoring and strategic dialogue among emerging and senior leaders alike. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm digital round of applause for our distinguished panelists today. And to get us started, allow me to hand over to Mr. Ibrahim, particularly Mr. Ibrahim, if you could reflect with us your perspective as a community leader and advocate for social cohesion. What are some of the key principles or practices that can help prevent hate speech from taking root in diverse, and if I may add, divided societies? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kwani. Thank you. Distinguished colleagues, it's a real privilege to represent the King Hamad Global Center for Coexistence and Tolerance on this panel on such an important topic. Digital platforms have become today's global meeting places, connecting billions of people across borders and opening unprecedented opportunities for dialogue and understanding. Yet alongside these benefits comes a pressing challenge: the rise of online hate speech. More than just offensive language, it risks normalizing division and hostility that, if unchecked, fuels discrimination and can spill into real-world violence. But with collective effort, these same platforms can also be harnessed to counter discrimination, amplify voices of respect, and strengthen the foundation of coexistence. The challenge is that there is no internationally agreed definition of online hate speech. Every country interprets it differently, and each platform applies its own rules. The result is fragmentation. Hate travels freely from one platform to another, while our responses remain uncoordinated. As you know, we each have our own unique culture based on our upbringing. And though one culture may view hate speech in different terms to another culture, it is that precise difference that we must tackle by our definition. The time has come for the international community to act. We need to advocate for two immediate steps. First, we need to begin developing an internationally recognized definition of online hate speech. Without clarity, there can be no accountability. Second of all, start the process of exploring a global convention, a framework rooted in human rights that balances freedom of expression with the duty to safeguard human dignity. Such a convention does not exist today, but serious consideration is needed if we are to close the loopholes exploited across both digital and real-world spaces, building on the United Nations Strategy and Action Plan on hate speech. Laws and policies alone will never be enough. Preventing hate speech requires resilient communities. From what the Center has observed, three principles are vital: teaching respect early on so difference is seen as strength, raising responsible digital citizens who pair skills with empathy, and keeping dialogue open so hostility does not take root. Public institutions, faith communities, and local leaders each have a role in providing frameworks, inspiring compassion, and bridging divides. When they act together, especially in moments of tension, they form the united front that safeguards social cohesion. Coexistence is not a passive act, but an active responsibility, and that responsibility must begin early. In this spirit, the Center is developing an activity workbook designed to promote coexistence among children. It will include interactive exercises that teachers and guardians can share with young people, each one instilling the values of respect, empathy, and dialogue. This is more than a resource. It's a model of how practical tools can strengthen resilience at the very foundation of society. We hope it can inspire others to develop similar initiatives in their own communities. At the same time, education must be reinforced by policy and law. An international framework could provide the backbone for broader change, aligning governments, educators, and technology companies under a shared responsibility to protect. Colleagues, if hate can cross borders in seconds, then so must our solutions. The digital generation deserves online spaces of empowerment, not endangerment. Let us start the process towards a unified definition and a global convention that ensures the internet becomes what it is meant to be, a tool for dialogue, understanding, and coexistence. The challenge for us today is to ensure that hate speeches never have the ability to negatively encroach on or actively distort the freedom of coexistence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ibrahim. Excellent. I really appreciate you highlighting the definition of problem of hate speech, of course, and the call for a convention, because I think a convention is as serious as the problem is, and I think that is the seriousness that is needed to match the issue. Thank you also for highlighting the principles of respect, of empathy, and of keeping dialogue open. Those online, please, participants, if you have questions for Mr. Ibrahim, please put them in the Q&A while I move on to my two other speakers, and then we will open it up for a short conversation to answer those questions. So Sibu, with your experience as working on online hate speech, what do you think are some of the key challenges that young people and children face online? And keeping in mind what Mr. Nunu mentioned, teaching or educating for respect, for empathy, and for dialogue early on, what do you think is the role of education, and particularly digital literacy, in strengthening and empowering young people and children alike? Over to you, Sibu.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. Just a little bit of background. My name is Sibu Szymanowska. I'm here representing Acque as a youth expert, but I also want to add that not only have I been a content analyst for Meta and Google, as well as a digital creator, a content creator. So I've actually been able to see firsthand how impactful social media can be and how incriminating hate speech can be too. Now, when it comes to social media, I think we have been basically approaching it the wrong way. And by this, I mean is that social media is here to stay. Social media, with the creation of Facebook almost 20 years ago, we've had around 20 years of experience where we have seen firsthand how, I apologize, I'm a little bit sick, how social media has expanded, but also the way algorithms work. And it's frightening to see how youth especially is being constantly exposed to hate messages, and how algorithms actually take advantage of all of this content and continues to spread it. This is some of I personally create content regarding interfaith dialogue and cross-cultural communication and understanding. And even I've been able to experience firsthand hate speech to the point where I've even, and I want to speak about this from a personal experience, where even I've experienced and faced death threats, and I've had to go offline for weeks at a time because of how much pressure there has been. Now, this is from a personal perspective, and I am an adult. I don't even want to imagine how impactful it can be for young adults or even for children to be facing this kind of content every single day. And so what I think that when it comes to media itself, it needs to be approached from two perspectives, from two perspectives, basically from the top and from the bottom. Now, when it comes to the top, I've seen firsthand. So basically, as a content analyst, our job was to pick up on different patterns that were arising, including hate speech, and to create policies to be able to fight Facebook and the people at the very top to see how we could create new policies and guidelines that could remove this content online. Now, this would sometimes take weeks and months at a time. So obviously, how can we so change needs to come from both a macro and a micro perspective. And so from a macro perspective, we need to continue pushing our governments to create stronger policies and guidelines that will force companies like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc., to create better policies to protect the users. And Germany's a great example, for example, where guidelines were created and Germany was basically fined within a matter of a day or two. They were fined billions of euros for not sticking to the guidelines that they had just put in place. But from a micro perspective, and obviously a macro perspective will take years and years to implement, but from a micro perspective, let's start at home. What are we doing at home? For those of you who have children, what are you actually teaching them any kind of media literacy? What are you doing at home to make sure that your children are able to use the internet? Because let's be real, you will not always have access to the content that your children are being faced with every single day. So from a home perspective, what are we doing at home? How are we talking to our children about the use of social media, how to counter hate speech, how to prevent it from happening, how to identify disinformation? I think these are some of the talks that we need to be having at home. But most importantly, how can we incorporate this into our schools? Now, I want to use Finland as an amazing example of how media literacy is now being included in its national curriculum, and the results have been absolutely, absolutely incredible. And we have even seen how 7-year-olds are able to evaluate information and able to see if it's real or not, if it's informative, if it's trustworthy. And by the age of 9, they have built an incredible awareness of disinformation and even already being able to identify on how to reject hate speech. So the results are there. We have been able to see it firsthand. I think it's just a matter of trying to see how we can incorporate this into the communities that we live in. And like I said, change can basically start from home if we allow it to. Thank you.
Excellent, Sibu. Thank you very much. I like how you are combining the two and how we need not wait for the one, but actually maybe begin by approaching from both directions, but pushing for policies significantly for the very top while we continue to do the sort of heavy lifting on the ground. I hope to come back to a question or two, especially in relation to what you've said and also what Mr. Nuno also mentioned. But let's see if our participants will have something to say to that as well. So final reminder before I pass it on to the third speaker of this first segment, if you have any questions for Sibu and for Mr. Nuno, please put them in the question and answer, not the chat. Thank you very much. Mr. Imran, sorry. Again, sorry if I keep sort of mispronouncing the name. I'm getting there. Imran, based on your work monitoring and countering online hate and disinformation, what trends are you seeing, particularly with regards to children and youth? And also, what effective strategies? You've seen a lot, you've reviewed, you've monitored a lot. So on the one hand, what trends are you seeing? And on the other hand, what do you think are the effective strategies to actually counter or address hate speech online? Over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good day, everyone. My name is Imran Ahmed. I'm Chief Executive and founder of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, based here in Washington, DC, although some of you may be able to work out that by my accent, I'm British. Just by way of introduction, my story started in 2015 and 16 in the UK, where I was a special advisor in the UK Parliament to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, the Right Honourable Hilary Benn MP. And we saw a number of things happening in quick succession, which really shocked me. One was the rise of a virulent anti-Semitism in the left of British politics. The following summer, in the summer of 2016, we had a referendum on whether or not the United Kingdom should remain in the EU. And we saw conspiracy theories and lies spreading at pace around social media, but being brought up on the doorstep unprompted by people when we were knocking on the doors and canvassing them for the election. And then towards the end of that election, in the summer of 2016, my colleague Jo Cox, who was a 41-year-old mother of two, a man who had read conspiracy theories on social media about how the EU was trying to import Muslim men to rape and therefore destroy the white race, took a knife and a homemade firearm and shot and stabbed and beat her to death in her constituency. So the question I put to myself then is the question that we're asking ourselves now in one respect, which is, how on earth does this happen? And I don't think it's just about the existence of hate. Hate's been around for a long time, probably since the beginning of humanity. Tribe, kin, in-out group thinking, we have a lot of sophisticated understanding of it. The problem that we have now is two things. First of all, quantity, and we are being flooded by a tidal wave of hate speech. And that's explained in part by the second problem, which is the relative prevalence of intolerance versus tolerance on digital platforms. Digital platforms that, as other speakers have said, like it or not, they have become the primary locus where most of us share information, establish relationships and maintain them, where we negotiate our values, our norms of attitude and behavior, our social mores, and also, crucially, where we negotiate the corpus of information that we call facts. And on social media platforms, because of the commercial imperatives that underpin them, they have designed algorithms to reorder the information on their platforms to promote some and demote others. And in practice, their platforms work to promote hate speech and conspiracy theories and disinformation. And that, friends, is an epistemic realignment, the kinds of which we haven't seen before. What do I mean by epistemic realignment? We, and I assume everyone on this webinar, have worked for a long time to make sure that the information that is given to children in particular, but to society, is pro-social, tolerant, is about uniting, connecting, forming bonds. And instead, the information that we are now most exposed to shatters those bonds, divides. And the idea that we can resist this through being better people, think of it like nutrition. If I shovel Big Macs in your food every day and then give you a leaflet at the end of the day saying you should eat healthy, are you going to be healthy? No. If I shovel disinformation, lies, and keep in mind, the reason why I talk about conspiracy theories and lies are hate relies on them. hate is inextricably linked to conspiracy theories and lies. Yeah, the best known examples come from anti-Semitism. The blood libel 2000 years ago, the protocols of the elders of Zion in the last century that informed Hitler's ideology, the great replacement theory that led to the loss of life in the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, but also in the mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand. And so when we have an information ecosystem that algorithmically is reordered to favor hate and lies that underpin that hate, we have a serious systemic problem. Now, at CCDH, we have thought hard about the fact that we need to build a systemic solution, and that we believe safety is based on transparency. So actually, we did a study once. We studied the prevalence of hate speech on X, the platform known as Twitter, after Elon Musk took over versus before he took over. Our research was on the front page of the New York Times. It showed a tripling in anti-Black racism in those weeks after he took over. They sued us for doing the research, not for being wrong. We were right. They sued us for the act of doing the research. So transparency on these platforms, we talk about them like they're voodoo, in part because we're not allowed to study them properly. So first of all, transparency. So we can be informed as to how we're being disinformed. Second, accountability, which is that there need to be bodies that can pose tough questions to these organizations and get real answers. I'm really proud that I was the first witness for my home country's Online Safety Act in 2021, in September 2021, and that became law in October 2023, and it's now coming into force. And Ofcom is the new agency that can ask tough questions and get real answers by pain of, on sort of pain of perjury. And then finally, responsibility. The truth is that social media platforms, despite their initial promise was so wonderful. It's why I still believe in social media, was that through familiarity, through connecting people, by making Timbuktu seem as close as Tyneside in Northeast England as Tulsa, Oklahoma, where my wife comes from, that we would reduce the earth. We would create familiarity and reduce racism. What a beautiful idea. But in reality, we all know that it's done quite the opposite. It's split us apart even in our own communities and countries. And so one of the ways that we can reverse that is by actually asking them to pay some of the costs associated with the most dangerous forms of hatred that erupt from their platforms. Two very good examples are, I live in Washington, D.C., down the road from where I am right now. There were riots 4 years ago caused by disinformed people armed with AR-15 assault rifles, attacking the Capitol. Another example, in my home country last year, in the summer, there were riots which were caused by the spread very rapidly of a lie that 3 young girls who were killed at a Taylor Swift dance party by a lunatic with a machete, that man was actually an asylum seeker. And it led to the worst race riots in my lifetime, I'm 46, in my country. And so I think that by asking them to bear the cost, we can do so. What can we do as parents right now? I think the most important thing we can do is establish dialogues with our kids. Our kids are being exposed to lies that they couldn't possibly have the information to be resilient against. And so what's absolutely crucial is a constant conversation with our kids, shame-free, about what they're seeing. So they're teaching us what they're seeing on these platforms that, let's be honest about it, most of us don't use. I don't use TikTok, it gives me a migraine. But we can then help them and educate them by contextualizing that information that they're seeing. So there you go, a strategic and a tactical response.
Thank you very much, Imran. Very, very, very clear and to the point, which I think raises a lot of questions. What you three have said, on the one hand, the definitional challenge, on the other, the sort of the two sort of journeys meeting halfway, and then of course the business model. And so maybe Mr. Ibrahim, to begin with you, there are questions online, but maybe if you could respond to one is the challenge of the convention, which is close to what Imran has brought up, is the business model. The convention will be the exact opposite to the business model of how these platforms work. So is it practical to go for convention, or should we just add a protocol? This is the question from one of the participants. And then Sibu and Imran, if you could respond to the question of how is it possible to tell apart real information and hate speech. So maybe if you could draw from some examples, and of course this goes back to Ibrahim's, to Nunu's point of the definitional challenge, but if you could respond to that. And then the final one is, how do we then inverse? If we cannot change the business model, which is the question from Albert Choriot from Kenya, is how do we then inverse these platforms and take advantage of them, take advantage of social media to build sort of more hate-free communities. So over to you three, beginning with Ibrahim, and then
Yes.
Sibu, and then Imran, and 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwanu. Can I just quickly go back to what I heard from Imran? And Imran, I really enjoyed listening to you because I think you brought out the essence of what we need to solve, basically. But let me just put it to you in this way. And I've got to make everybody understand one thing, that opinions are allowed. People are allowed to express their opinions. In a free society, we're allowed to express our opinions. Now, put that to one side. What you have when you're looking at society and you're looking at the social media, you have what's like a Venn diagram. You have the left side, which is a public world. You have the right side, which is a private world. And you have the middle part, which is the mixture that we live in with the social media. And by that I mean the social media infringes upon both our public lives and our private lives. Now, if we look at that and try to understand something, if we are totally free to express our own opinions, we would be in our homes expressing our opinions without anyone getting affected, anyone feeling any part of any hate speech or anything like that. But if we're in the public plane, we could not do that because we know we'd be offending people. So what we have here is we have to distinguish between what is privately allowed to be said and publicly allowed to be said, so that we don't encroach on other people's freedoms and we don't create that hate speech that we're all trying to tackle. So I just wanted to bring that up to you, Imran, because I think that's the area which we need to tackle, the one where both the public and the private encroach upon each other. And I believe a convention would be able to solve that problem, because a convention would be able to understand how we can view private and how we can view public. And we separate the two issues. That is where a convention can help us. Thank you, Kwani.
Thank you very much. So maybe Imran, maybe you respond, and maybe also elaborate on Nunu's interjection while keeping in mind some of the questions before, and then Sibu. Thank you.
I mean, if I would make the point, I couldn't agree with you more that a convention is useful and work on the definitional aspects of hate speech so we are crisper in understanding precisely what it is that we are worried about is important. Look, if I'm right and hate's been around for as long as human beings have been around, then the fight to counter hate has been around for as long as human beings have been around. I'm a father of a 1-year-old. She's going to live a life that I can't imagine with technologies that I can't imagine. but she will also have to face hate. Even if we all succeed in this room, other forms of hate will persist. Other vectors, other spaces will be found. Hate is a virus, a resilient one that will always find spaces in which it is given the chance to breed, right? And we have worked really hard in our offline society to make hate unacceptable. On social media, it is not just not unacceptable, it is given not just freedom of speech, but extraordinary reach as well. So if the algorithms are promoting that which divides us because it gets people arguing, therefore spending more time on platforms, therefore consuming ads, because social media is not a public good provided by non-profits. Mark Zuckerberg does not work out of a basement like I do because I run a non-profit. I'm sure he works out of some sort of bunker on an island of his own, I don't know, surrounded by cronies like a James Bond villain. But they make enormous amounts of money from that advertising. And for that commercial reason, they increase the prevalence of it. And so what I think that we're going to need is a multivalent approach to combating and countering the hate speech that's affecting the lives of kids, because none of us in this room here are children, but children are being affected in two ways. The first one is, of course, for those kids who, you know, I was called a Paki when I was a kid, and that's the insult in the UK. That's what they call brown people. I'm actually Pashtun Afghan, but like, you know, everyone gets called a Paki. And every day I got told I smelled of curry, I'm South Asian, I'm dirty, I'm different, I'm wrong. But when I went home, or when I was in the classroom, I was fine. Not anymore. Social media tracks you wherever you are. All of us have cell phones, right? These things constantly bringing up allowing spaces to be bullied, allowing spaces for messages to be sent, notifications going off. You are never, ever alone anymore. And that's really difficult for young kids. You know, if any of us believed that so many people felt that way about us, if we felt that if we even open our mouth or left our home, people would be racist to us, we just wouldn't leave our homes. So it's affecting kids in that way. The second way is they're falling for it themselves. We did a study last year. It's the most disturbing polling we've ever done. 14 to 17-year-olds in the US and UK, and then adults. We did 9 conspiracy theories. For the first time, the age cohort with the highest conspiracist beliefs were 14 to 17-year-olds. More so than generally you find it with older adults. It's not true anymore. Kids who've been brought up in algorithmically curated content environments, their belief systems, what they believe to be true, has gone completely off the rails. And so kids are being affected in these two very different ways. And I do think that the tools that we've used in the past to deal with offline hate cannot fully be translated or need bolstering with new tools based on a real understanding of the difference in the rules of physics of online spaces versus offline spaces. But I do encourage we need a complete proliferation of approaches, because some will work, some will not work as well, but actually in collaboration, I think that they can work very well.
Thank you very much, Imran, and thank you very much also, Mr. Nunu, for this exchange. So Sibu, over to you, but maybe if you could zoom in while we close this first part of our conversation, this first segment, if you could zoom in on, there is a question on how do you tell these two things apart, real and hate, and also what do you think works? Those little things that teachers, there's some teachers joining, and some educators at large joining this webinar. They want to know what can they go and do while we continue to fight the Goliath that have implemented a digital ecosystem that allows for this to actually turn a profit. Over to you.
Thank you once again. Well, first of all, like I said, the best example that we have right now when it comes to national curriculums is the one set by the government of Finland. They have so much information online, documentaries, articles, studies. So if you're listening to this, I highly, highly suggest you go check those out. Now, just like we encounter hate speech and we encounter disinformation and misinformation, how do we recognize it right now? How do you teach a child to recognize these? Because obviously we have different analytical skills and critical thinking skills that have been developed over time that children might not have. And what I want to go back to is basically teaching children about critical thinking, empathy, which I think is extremely important, and cross-checking. And something that I want to highlight is that I don't think we should be banning children or even preventing them from using social media, because like I said, it's just like the introduction of artificial intelligence. It's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And the best thing we can do is to teach them how to use it responsibly and how to identify these things. So, for example, if somebody's posting something that is a little bit incriminating, teaching children how to recognize who is posting this and what is the purpose. If I'm targeting a specific group of people, who's posting it? What is the purpose? Do they just want to disseminate information that's not real? Like, is this real or not? And then also generalizations, saying all migrants are this, for example, like whenever we generalize, it normally comes down to hate speech. And most importantly, I apologize, I'm really sick today. Sweeping generalizations. And one example that the Finnish government was using was that there was, and it was fascinating the way that they did it. Basically, there was an athlete being accused of using substances, right? And the article was written, and in the article they zoomed into an African American person in the article, and the article only featured an African American athlete. Now, it was not the African American athlete who was taking the substances, but they were teaching the children and asking them, okay, if you see an African American being zoomed in, what do you assume? And they would say, oh, we assume that it's actually the African American that's consuming these substances. And then they zoomed out of the image and they were showing the children the actual image, and they just happened to, media in itself was trying to target a specific group of people. And we see this everywhere, right? Media is part of this as well. And last but not least, I think empathy is something that can definitely be taught in schools, but also at home. Now, if I see someone referring to a group of people in a very harmful way, I would basically ask a child, how would you feel if a person that you love is being referred to in this way? Would you take it or not? How would that make you feel? It will probably not make them feel good. And I think it comes down to basically that, the empathy and teaching them how to think, how to analyze things beyond from what they see. Again, please refer back to the Finnish national curriculum. It's absolutely incredible. And I do think it's an example that can be followed in many different places as well. Thank you.
Excellent, Sibu. Thank you very much. That was an excellent conclusion to this first segment. I think there's some questions coming up in the Q&A, so I would encourage the three of you to maybe look at those and see if you can type in some answers or some resources. And I think we will come back to some of these questions maybe at the end. With that, now allow me maybe to introduce the next part, the final part 2 of our conversation today. And I will kickstart it with Dr. Maria Teresa Garrido. So Maria, maybe if you can reflect with us, building on what you've had until now, the monolithic digital corporations that have created business model that makes it very, very difficult, the need for a convention as the only way to address some of these sort of meta macro issues, and of course the little things that educators can continue to do to push back, since anyway we cannot totally, as Sibu was saying, we cannot stay away from these platforms. How do we actually transform them? And so with that, maybe reflect on the human rights standards and legal frameworks that can be used to strengthen the capacities of educators, civil societies, and young people to challenge hate speech. Over to you.
Thank you very
And
much.
let's, for the next three, sorry to interrupt, for the next three, we stick to time as much as possible so that we have another excellent sort of a dialogue at the very end. Thank you, Maria, over to you.
Thank you very much from the University for Peace. It's a pleasure to be here and to be part of the co-organizers of this very important talk. And to go back to your question, Kwani, and what the previous speakers were mentioning, we have different ideas that I want to address before going to the specific part of the human rights. And I want to present some stats on who is actually using the internet and what group are we referring to. Because I think it's important to talk about numbers. We know about particular cases, which I really appreciated the previous speakers talking about their experiences in the field. But I want to mention these different stats coming from an organization called We Are Social. They do this type of stats every year, amazing if you want to do the comparison. But today's focus should be on the youth and children. And I want to highlight how many people are we really talking about, because we're talking about millions like under 29 years old. We have 600 million, 621, 656. So we have a huge number of people who is affected by different communications, different conversations that are taking place online. And one of the most, I will say, revealing type of information is this one. What are the main reasons for using the internet? So we go for people between 16 to 24 years, and according again to We Are Social, is to contact friends and family, find information, and watch videos and shows. And the same goes for the second group between 25 and 34, that is contact friends and family, find information, watch videos and show. So when we ask where is exactly hate speech taking place, we can see that it's between communications among friends, among family. So as one of the previous speakers was mentioning, the idea of a systemic problem goes beyond education systems, go beyond the formal settings that we already know that exist, but goes to this micro level that previous speakers were talking about. So how is this hate speech manifests is key to actually understand how, from a legal perspective, we can intervene and have different responses to the protection of human rights. So the first way of manifestation of hate speech is by direct abuse. Like, this is easy to identify, it's a specific type of word coding that can be easily identified, and this is basically the examples that the previous speakers were sharing. So when we have direct abuse, we're talking about discrimination, we're talking about the exercise of the right to freedom of expression in a way that is illegal because it's attempting against the right of other people, it's attempting against the most basic idea of human dignity. And with that, we already have, as some of the previous speakers were mentioning, human rights standards. We have an international body of human rights that is addressing this idea of direct abuse. Maybe as the previous speakers mentioned, we don't have like a common definition of what is hate speech, but with direct abuse, we can easily identify what rights are in place and how we can protect them better. Another form in which hate speech manifests is, and that is maybe more difficult to find, it's memes, like these jokes or edited images, songs that include this type of speeches, this type of information that is mixed with pop culture, and that's even more difficult first to identify and then to regulate, because who should be regulating? Who has the power to actually identify a meme and go in the next direction? Or maybe we shouldn't have these images going around, or maybe certain songs shall be banned by different platforms. So in this, we use same standards on human rights, and the idea is to apply them through domestic lenses. So the first thing that we should be looking at is how regulations are in place in our domestic settings, because human rights standards, international law is complementary to what we already have in the state. So to threaten and to actually impede or limit the distribution of this information through short conversations and like this type of communication should be addressed with local regulations. But then we also have like these other ways that maybe, as one of the speakers was mentioning, we can have the private sector actually regulating, because one of the issues is the coded language, the use of hashtags, the use of different signals that can be identified by platforms. And this goes again for regulation and human rights standards to understand what is the best protection for human dignity, what allows the simultaneous protection of human rights, but also limiting the effect that this type of speech actually have in different settings. So how, and I want to transform the conversation in the last minute that I have for this part into how to transform that conversation into a peace building initiative. Like we have been talking about hate, and I think it's important, but we also need to highlight the idea of how we bring peace to the conversation. And first is strengthening peaceful communications. Children are not only communicating between them, but between adults, between youth, and informal and non-formal educations. So if we highlight peaceful communication, how does it look like? How is it different from hate? It will be easier for them to actually see what is a good communication, what is a good standard. Then ideally, we need to amplify peace initiative and ideas that promote human rights. It's easier to engage with hate speech because it's highly emotional. It tackles like different discrimination stereotypes. And that's why it's easy to identify. But then I think it's our work to identify how this peace initiative can promote human rights, and through that produce the change in legal settings and legal standards that we need. So with that, I finish, and over back to you. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for sticking to the time, and a lot of issues that you've brought to the surface. And I think that there was a question that maybe you keep reflecting on while we go to the other two speakers and come back, and that was on, the difference between freedom to express oneself and hate speech, but also, and this is for everyone, for all the panelists, maybe to reflect on at the end, is the question, the excellent question on how do you educate for critical thinking in a society where digital platform owners do not want people thinking for themselves, which is, and I think that applies for everything else. Now I hand it over to Antia. Antia, could you share with us, in the spirit of empowerment, could you share with us a little about your innovative, excellent project and how you sort of used it to empower young people to challenge hate speech online? Over to you, Antia.
Gracias. Buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Espero que estéis viendo mi pantalla. Voy a darle un segundo.
We can hear you.
Sorry.
Antia, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm trying to share my screen. I think now
okay.
you can see it. Sorry.
No worries.
Bueno, desde la Fundación FAD Juventud estamos trabajando estos proyectos de ciudadanía global desde el Departamento de Educación para la Ciudadanía Global, y hoy venimos a presentar el proyecto Hate Trackers Beyond Borders, un proyecto Erasmus que ha sido financiado y ejecutado entre 2023 y 2025. Estas son las entidades socias que han formado parte del proyecto. A nivel europeo contamos con CAMOP desde Grecia, ID en Fuga desde Italia, con Hope for Children desde Chipre, CHIFA en Italia y FAT Juventud aquí en España como entidad social. Trackers Beyond Borders es un proyecto destinado a población joven y a adolescentes, también a organizaciones juveniles, con el objetivo de combatir esta discriminación expresada en discursos de odio, como venimos comentando, también de forma online, pero también de forma presencial, como comentaban también mis compañeros y compañeras, que no solo los discursos de odio y la desinformación hay que combatirla en los espacios digitales, sino también en lo presencial, y que jóvenes y adolescentes sepan reconocer y actuar en contra de esta vulneración de derechos humanos. La metodología utilizada y planteada en este proyecto ofrece lo que es mucha flexibilidad a la hora de ejecutarlo y de implantarlo con jóvenes y adolescentes, y se basa en la teoría de Humberto Eco de guerrillas semiológicas o Semiological Guerrilla Units. Esta metodología permitió que jóvenes activistas cuestionaran las narrativas ya existentes, ¿no? Generando alternativas o contranarrativas, y centrándose no tanto en las personas emisoras del mensaje, sino en quien recibe ese mensaje discriminatorio, en ese discurso de odio o incluso en el propio delito de odio. Y como mencionábamos, es un proyecto europeo financiado por la convocatoria Erasmus K2, en una ejecución de 24 meses y con un monto total de 400.000 euros. Los resultados han conseguido alcanzar más de 2.500 personas jóvenes usando la web app que os enseñaré a continuación, y 80 personas participando en las guerrilla units o esta red de jóvenes activistas que creamos en todos los países participantes. Los objetivos del proyecto, como comentábamos, sensibilizar a personas jóvenes y desarrollar sus habilidades de pensamiento crítico en una edad entre 14 y 24 años para que sepan cómo enfrentarse a estos discursos de odio, reconocerlos, tanto en lo digital como en lo presencial. Otro de los objetivos es crear esta red de activistas de 20 personas por país para que fueran ellas y ellos los que ejecutaran acciones para luchar contra los discursos de odio y fomentando la inclusión y previniendo la discriminación. Y también pues, sensibilizar y crear una conciencia sobre la importancia de no solo conocerlos, sino también prevenir, identificar y erradicar este discurso de odio, poniendo también el foco en minimizar el impacto en las víctimas. Las fases del proyecto han sido fundamentalmente 4. En primer momento, creamos un grupo motor de 5 personas jóvenes en cada uno de los países que querían formar parte de esta red. Y estas personas jóvenes viajaron juntas a Turín para poner en común pues, también sus sabidurías y habilidades y formarse en temas de discurso de odio, activismo y activismo, que también tenía en cuenta este proyecto, este componente de arte y activismo. Se crea una red de activistas en cada uno de los países. Aquí es donde contamos un poco con la flexibilidad de la metodología del proyecto que os comentaba anteriormente, ya que vivimos ahora mismo una situación en la que las personas jóvenes, pues, por temas de precariedad y de contextos diversos, su compromiso muchas veces no es del todo implicarse del todo en este tipo de acciones. Por lo tanto, llegamos a otros contextos como la educación formal, realizando acciones para sensibilizar a adolescentes y jóvenes en esta temática y realizando también prevención y dando a conocer el tema para que pudieran reconocer discursos de odio y también tomar acción contra ellos. Y por último, queremos enseñaros también nuestro recurso de la web app que tenemos disponible en los 4 idiomas en los que se llevó a cabo el proyecto: inglés, italiano, griego y español. Está disponible en la página web oficial del proyecto, que es heytrackers.com, y también a través de este QR podéis acceder a la versión que tenemos disponible en el campus de FAT Juventud. Y es una web app interactiva donde adolescentes y jóvenes pueden elegir entre un escenario que tiene lugar en un instituto o un escenario, que es este que podéis ver aquí, que tiene lugar en un festival queer. Entonces, mediante una serie de iconos, las personas usuarias acceden a contenido desde qué significa el racismo, qué significa el movimiento Black Lives Matter, o incluso ponerse en la piel de una situación que ocurre, por ejemplo, en este caso en el festival, y saber cómo enfrentarse a esta situación en la que se está dando discriminación o discurso de odio. Entonces funciona, sigue disponible en la web, es un recurso muy útil para utilizar tanto en el aula como fuera del aula, incluso en familia para poder enseñarle a adolescentes y jóvenes, así que animamos a todo el mundo a que acceda a ello y también a que si tenéis dudas sobre el proyecto, queréis colaborar de alguna manera, siguen todos los recursos disponibles en la página web. Y es un proyecto que se puede replicar en otros contextos, en otros idiomas, que también dan sostenibilidad a la acción, creando como estos grupos de jóvenes activistas en otros lugares del mundo. Así que muchas gracias y cualquier pregunta estamos a disposición.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Gracias, Antia. And now to our final speaker, and Antia, if you could put those links in the chat, those were excellent resources that I think a lot of people, as you mentioned, can benefit from. So if you could just drop those links in the chat, that would be wonderful. And now for our final intervention, I invite Lord Raval to reflect with us on you've had issues around faith, of course, but you've also had issues around maybe not explicitly, but issues around leadership. And for one participant was mentioning that there's some countries where politics is transitioning, and those tend to have sort of high rates of hate speech. Same with elections and so on. So there's fundamentally a question of leadership here. So if you could reflect with us on your experience working with leaders and youth across faith, and what role you think interfaith collaboration and ethical leadership can play in transforming hate speech and driving societies towards more social justice and peace. Over to you, Lord Raval.
Thank you so much, Kwani. Can I just check? Do I have 3 minutes? Is that correct?
You have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay,
Yes.
good. All right. So I wanted to say a number of things. Firstly, I'm just very grateful to join this conversation. And one of the things that is very, very apparent is that this issue of digital hate is complex. And I note what Imran and others have said, that we need a multivalent, systemic approach. So in this complexity, what that means to me is that we need things that are top down, bottom up, middle out. And in that regard, I have some experience of changing people. And I want to just refer to that, if I may, very, very quickly. The first thing to say is that I think it was in the 90s when I was working in classrooms that I noticed that it was an inner city school in a part of the northern part of the UK, and a young 14-year-old girl told a guy that she liked him. The guy didn't know how to respond, so he and his other guy friends suddenly started texting this woman, and in those days the phones weren't as complex as they are now, and suddenly we saw bullying transmute from words or letters spoken in person into this very, very, very visceral, intimate space, because you'd carry your, mobile phone, the mobile world inside you, and that I have seen over decades. This has just proliferated. And you talk about algorithms. What we're talking about are some of the brightest, smartest minds on the planet, whether they're doing it intentionally or not, conspiring to make addictions amongst our young people. And I see this because I'm a busy person. My wife is a busy person. We have a 6-year-old. And our 6-year-old, sometimes we put her in front of her favorite program. We've given her an iPad. And my gosh, what a mistake. It's created an addiction. So how do you counter some of these things. And I just want to offer you, if I may, one aspect of education that I think is routinely overlooked. So can I say I agree with Mr. Nunu that we need a universal convention and a standardized definition of hate speech so we know what we're countering. But I'm a legislator now, and legislation can only go so far. What we need is something very different. And that approach is actually one that creates changes in people's lives. And I want to just give you an example of how the kind of thing that we teach some of our young people. So you consider the statement, the teenager hit the elderly man. You know, we put that to some of our young people, and all sorts of ideas come, even amongst young people. And then I say, well, the idea that the business of a leader is to expand on that, to say, well, what was the context? So if suddenly I say the teenager hit the elderly man in order to prevent him from choking, the context is entirely different. And what happens is that there is a process of deletion, distortion, and generalization that are absolutely natural, that we need to recognize. So we deleted in that statement a whole process of the context, and we then rely on our biases. If I invite some of the young people here to imagine going to their fridge at home, opening the door, finding a lemon, and then slicing it and then biting it, they're salivating. And I'm just using words. There is no lemon. I'm distorting stuff in their heads. And I'm suddenly creating ideas and responses through language. And then if I say that, you know, there are whole categories of people that I may have experienced a particular way, and then I see that all people of this type, so teenagers, hit elderly people, if that becomes the general norm in my head, I will perceive young people in a particular way. So these things are immensely natural, and to guard against it, to fortify against it, I create a series of programs that help you to notice, so you become aware of some of these characteristics that are proliferating around us. Then you name that this is deletion, this is distortion, this is generalization, this is happening to me. So you're conscious about it. And then what you do is you're part of a network, and you, so 3 N's, you're noticing, naming, and then being part of a collective group of similar-minded people that can hold you, that you could check your biases with, and then together you can affect change. And that process undergirds so many of the leadership programs that I am part of. And there's an actual technology to cultivate change amongst young people. And young people learn best from other young people. So it's really important that you create a cadre of leaders. I absolutely agree that there are legislative interventions that need to be made. My heart breaks when I hear Imran saying that he was prevented from doing research that could have shed light on what is actually happening to us. But until that is squared, and that's going to take a long time, what we must do is emphasize these legislative, or undergird these legislative approaches with actually meaningful education that is fit for the society that we're in now. And that means an emphasis not just on classroom-based education, but actually creating virtual communities. And it's been referred to that last summer there were these horrific riots based on misinformation following the tragedy of these three, the deaths of these young women. And I was on the radio the next day, actually referring to that on what is the UK's most heard radio station breakfast program. And what I was really interested in is that there was also a countervailing force through religious actors. So just as social media can get into your viscerally and it can impact you, faith can also impact and mediate people's responses in a very visceral and down-to-earth way. And I was interested that many of the alumni of mine, so I've been working for the last 30 years, not just in classrooms, but with faith leaders, introducing them across differences, not to agree on things, but to disagree well. And it is those people across boundaries of difference that cooperated to build bridges where some had broken. And I am only sad that their power of uniting and convening and bringing things together wasn't amplified sufficiently. And we have alumni, though, people like this, leaders everywhere. And the white working class kids, and this is my final point that I started with, in those classrooms where we taught some of these processes of how to, notice, name, and be part of a network. The digital age has enabled them to be a part of the network. So when Brexit occurred, this is when Britain left the European Union, and there was a whole narrative of racism around it. There were people, I'm not saying that Brexit occurred because of racism or everyone who voted for Brexit were racist, but there was an intolerant, xenophobic narrative that was kind of legitimized. I noticed that the people online 20 or 15 years later who stood up against that, narrative were these young white kids, including the girl who was bullied and the guy who and the crowd of people who bullied her. And they became a bulwark, albeit in a humble way, on Facebook, on TikTok, on social media, in other forms of social media, against this onslaught. And that's the only thing I can see, that grassroots approaches based on the creation of, I call it leadership, you can call it any other name, that proliferates. There you go. I've exceeded my 5 minutes, but there you go.
No worries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I think this is still in the spirit of what is emerging, really, which is these are overall systemic issues. We all agree that they should be addressed by a whole range of also equally systemic issues. But at the same time, in between, we continue to do the little that we can to push back and to build this movement as well. In that spirit, Maria Teresa, there was a particular question for you, which is, and we have 5 minutes before we wind down. So we spend those 5 minutes responding to these questions. So Maria Teresa, if you could begin, and then maybe Antia to add 2 questions. 3 questions actually. One is, how do you balance freedom to express and hate speech? We go back to the original definition problem. And if you can be as concrete as possible, that would be excellent. And then the other question, which maybe the 3 of you can reflect on, is how do we bring in the parents and the community so that we broaden the educational experience to be 3-dimensional? The teacher or the educator, the parents, and the setting. And then finally, a question for Antia, which is scaling up these digital initiatives that empower young people. How do we scale them into movements that can actually systemically challenge or change things? Over to you, Maria Teresa, and then Antia, and then if we have time, Lord Ravan.
Thank you. I will say with a human rights question, not to go on the others' ideas. So first, we need to remember what Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights establishes, because it's the framework that we can use everywhere. So Article 19.3 established the regulations that can be imposed to the exercise of the right to freedom of expression. So freedom of expression is not an absolute right. It can be limited by law for the protection of the right of other people, health, public health, public security, and other issues. And I want to stay only with the idea of the protection of other rights, because this is where the majority of the states are using human rights framework to say, in these ways, we're going to limit the exercise of the right, or we're going to punish those who are attempting against the right of others. And I think the most commonly known case is libel and defamation laws that are already in place, that we already have as a standard of what is allowed and what is not, and we can use it for disinformation, misinformation, hate speech, all of these forms of speech and communication that are having this effect that we want to reduce and limit. And so I will say, just for the sake of time, read Article 19 of the ICCPR, go for YouTube videos on how limitations can be imposed, and then check what the legal regulations in your own country are saying about these different things. So over to you, Kwani.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, Article 19 is a wonderful resource, and I think we'll put that in the chat. Antia, over to you on how these education digital initiatives that empower young people can be scaled, and what are the challenges that young social entrepreneurs like you face in trying to scale these initiatives. Antia, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I would say that to escalate this kind of initiatives or projects to a huge or a high movement, a big movement, we have to take into account not only teenagers or youth, but we have to involve also families, as we were saying before, and children, children, families, and all the whole society, to make this initiative or this kind of movements higher than only a small project. So we have to carry on working with not only youth in our case, but with all of the areas of all the society.
Thank you very much, Auntie. And then finally, before we conclude, Lord Raval, you have a minute to reply to the question on how do we bring in parents, communities, and you did mention an excellent example of your 6-year-old child, and with education in mind, how do we broaden it such that it brings you in as parents, but also as members of community? Over to you.
Okay, so that also refers to scale, and I find scaling really, really difficult because while maintaining the quality. So on our programs, it's unfashionable, but the idea is to love your participants, so you can only love so many. But meaning deep care, deep understanding of what they're going through, and then you can build on them through coaching, through all sorts of. So the program, that I'm referring to in this regard is the Leadership for Coexistence program with the King Hamad Center. That's an example of where you really, really care for each person. The only way that I know about scaling is if reinforced by apps, every school, every educational system could somehow replicate with qualitative a community approach to this form of leadership that counters digital hate and other forms of hate.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I was hoping for another 5 minutes to conclude, but I was given a mandate to try and finish by 4:25, and it is 4:24. So I cannot give it back to Mr. Nunu or Imran or Sibu, and so I'll have to conclude here. I want again to thank you very much, and I think given the time that we were given, we've done justice to the topic. We've come to the conclusion that these are systemic. In some cases, you have monolithic digital entities that actually turn a profit for hate to proliferate. So it's quite difficult to address them. But what education can do is these little spaces to cultivate critical thinking, to cultivate empathy, to cultivate respect, to cultivate community, and to empower young people through the digital platforms and instrument themselves, in fact, so that young people and children can use that power to transform them to address these very systemic issues. And so with that, I conclude, and I thank you for the patience. I thank you for answering the question, and for the participants, for the questions that we could not answer, please bear with us and empathize with the fact that maybe we did not have enough time to do justice to the topic, but we've done enough within that. And so I pass it back to Francisco to conclude, and I thank you again very much.
Thank you, Kwani, for this great moderation today during our discussions. We really appreciate it. And as we come to the closure of this final webinar on our series on transformative approaches to addressing hate speech through education, I wanted to thank everyone here who has joined us today from all around the world. It was great seeing all the places from which you were connecting today, but also to thank all the speakers for not only sharing your knowledge and expertise, but also for sharing your convictions and your personal histories. Today we heard about how online hate speech splits us, gives the perfect environment for lies and conspiracy theories to grow unchecked, and how it provides and how it can spread in seconds through algorithms without having a proper international framework that provides an answer to it. But we also heard the potential social media has to bring us closer from Timbuktu to Washington in the blink of an eye. How countries have already been taking action by preparing guidelines and even integrating into their national curriculums, and how peace should be at the core of all of our actions, highlighting that peaceful communication in both formal and informal settings will allow children to identify how communication should be. And finally, hearing concrete projects that promotes not only empathy, but provides children and youth with critical thinking skills to be able to understand and process information on social media that reaches to them. All we have heard today brings hope and brings different pathways in which we can make hate unacceptable. Thanks also, I would like to extend our sincere thanks to our partners, UNESCO, the King Hamad Global Center for Coexistence and Tolerance, and UPeace, the University for Peace, for this meaningful collaboration. This series of webinars is just one step of a longer journey we have shared. And also a special thanks to our interpreters today for their great support, and which allowed us to communicate in a better place. So thank you once again, and let's us stay connected as we continue this vital work together. Thank you.